Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's University Business web seminar, which is entitled How Athens State University Built Hybrid Classrooms from Scratch, which is brought to you by the generous support of our sponsor here today, Nureva. Now, before we get started, I would just like to share just a few housekeeping items with you all. For technical support, please use the chat panel, which you can find on the right side of your screen. Then select on my name, which is Stephen Blackburn, and then type your message if you're having any technical issues, and I should get to you shortly. If you don't have computer speakers, or maybe you prefer to listen privately, then you can please dial the phone number and access code that I will be posting in the chat window in a few moments, so look out for that. Today we'll also be welcoming any questions you have with a Q&A session that will take place at the end of the presentation. To submit a question, please use the Q&A panel, which you can find at the bottom right side of your screen, like the chat, and then send your questions to all panelists, which should be the default option. If for whatever reason you don't see the chat, or just look to the right side of your screen again, and then click on the expand triangle, which is located directly in front of the panel name, to make sure you have access to it. Also, something important to note really quickly, if you would like to access the web seminar at a later time, you'll be pleased to know that everyone who's registered and who is attending today will receive an email with a link to the slides and an archive recording. And with that, it is my pleasure to introduce to you all our speakers today. First, we have David Walker, who is the Director of Athens Teaching and Learning Innovation Services at Athens State University. And with him, we have Adrian Doughty, who is the North American Director at Nureve. Hi, guys. Thank you for joining us.
Good to be here.
All right, perfect. And you may now begin.
All right, so thanks so much for joining us today, everyone. My name is Adrian, and we'll be walking through how Athens State went from not having a lot of expansion opportunity in their classrooms to going through the planning all the way through the delivery phase of supporting basically an entire hybrid environment. It was a journey that David was very intentional in, and we've got a couple of questions we'll be walking through with him, and he will give us his answers. So step one was the planning phase. So David, as we discussed, I'll just ask you the question and then you go ahead and
Sure.
answer. As we discussed, you went from zero to a fully supported online environment. What were some of the biggest challenges you faced during that phase?
Sure. Thanks, Adrian. I think actually to say that we started from scratch, let's go ahead and go to the next slide. While to say we started from scratch isn't quite accurate, while it is true that the pandemic forced us to reconsider the role technology plays in the delivery of instruction, our starting point was really a set of learning spaces like the one you see here that were designed around the assumption that classrooms were closed ecosystems. In other words, that learning was an event that happened in a specific geographical space, involving primarily the transfer of information from the instructor to the students. We had courses at that time that were fully online, but most of those courses were asynchronous. So the biggest challenge that we faced in the pandemic were the face-to-face classes. And so basically of those, some were taught from home. Professors just simply went home and taught those courses from home. But the most challenging scenario was the one where half of the students were in the classroom and the other half were online. And the instructors encountered that phenomenon quite often, and they never knew until they got to class what the mix of online and virtual students would be. Next slide.
So there was no planning, right? People could just sort of choose on the fly what they wanted to do and how they wanted to participate, right?
Well, yeah, that was the what our institution did was they basically let instructors kind of negotiate those issues with the students. And so it was on a course by course basis. But what we found was that instructors just didn't really know until they got to class, whether half, the students were either sick or they were quarantined or were just afraid to come in, or they just had normal other, non-pandemic related issues. But the accumulation of folks in all of that was that there were several classes where there were a lot of students that just couldn't or wouldn't attend. And so this need to provide synchronous opportunity for the students in the class and the students online really presented itself. And all of that in the context too of this closed ecosystem bias. And so what we realized is that bias that informed the construction of our classroom spaces left us with a technology infrastructure that needed to be totally re-envisioned so that everyone in the learning space, whether they were in the physical classroom or in virtual space, could be clearly seen and heard, and that all participants could share content with each other. And this meant that we needed new webcams, we needed speakers, microphones, digital whiteboards, computers, and software, all of that supported by a highly robust Wi-Fi and a network system. Now, of all the technologies that we ended up having to pull in, one of the very biggest challenges was sound, and specifically making sure that the classroom participants, those folks who were in the classroom space, instructors and students, could be heard.
This makes me think of a clarifying question, which is when would students start in the room and then potentially attend a class remotely if they got sick or for whatever reason? So they had to be able to attend and participate regardless, right? Didn't matter how they were coming in; they had to be equal
Correct.
participants.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. All right. So audio. You said audio was an important factor that you're focused on delivering it. What made audio that so important for you?
So I come from a background in video production, and for I won't tell you how many years, but many years in video production. But I also have training in instructional design, and those two components in my life have taught me to consider not just the design and delivery of instruction as an instructional designer would do, but also to consider the conditions under which that learning occurs. And those include the conditions both within the learner, but also those in the learning space, the learning environment. And technology plays a huge role in that. And so in my experience, audio has always been the most disregarded modality. And yet this is crucial. And I'll give you an example. Any video producer will tell you that if you could have a great looking video and poor audio. And with those, and your great looking video is unwatchable if you have poor audio. By contrast, you can have a visually mediocre video, but with good sound, and you still have something that's watchable. And I believe the same is true in the classroom. You can have the best lesson plan, you can have great visuals, but if participants can't be heard, or if there's background noise, or the sound is over processed, or if there's too much echo, eventually your lesson's going to fail. The harder learners have to work to process the sound or filter out extraneous noise, the greater the drag on their cognitive resources for learning. Over time, this is going to wear them down and they disengage.
Did you find that was equally true for your professors? That same cognitive load?
I'm not sure I understand.
Did you have any remote teachers who had to listen really hard?
Oh, sure. Yeah, this concept is a universal concept. It comes straight out of cognitive psychology. And it's a cognitive load factor that all of us as humans have to deal with. The more extraneous things are in our space, the harder it is for us to focus. And so you're right. So it's harder for instructors to teach if they can't understand their students, or if there are these different extraneous variables in the environment.
Got it. Now you went as far as to define your entire definition of quality, right? Can you walk us through what your definition was?
Yes. Go ahead and let's go to the next slide.
Yep. There we go.
So we basically came up with a criteria that we used to evaluate systems, and it was basically these 5 things. First was clarity of sound. Were the specific vocal frequencies accurately conveyed so that speech was easily intelligible? The second is reduction of background noise. Were the extraneous noises like the air conditioner or other students kind of whispering or speaking, or other machine noises in the environment, were they sufficiently reduced? And then there's this other factor, which is compression artifacts. And these are those unwanted sounds and frequency modulations that every single manufacturer of these audio systems has to introduce in order to accomplish, to achieve all of this. But there are compression artifacts, and those are unwanted sounds and frequency modulations that you hear as they're working. And all of the services have them, and they're just really distracting. And then the fourth criteria was the ease of installation and use. It had to be quick and easy. It had to be easy to install and easy to use. And then the final one is it just had to be affordable. And so we applied those 5 criteria to the different manufacturers' products that we researched. And go ahead to the next slide, please. And what we found was the Nareva really did an excellent job at satisfying all of those criteria. They were, the sound was very crisp and clean. It was intelligible as we walked around the room at different points. It did an excellent job of filtering out the background noise. In fact, in our test instance, we had to install it about 12 inches away from a projector that had a built-in fan. And so I was really skeptical that it was going to work. And I was really stunned because it totally filtered out that fan noise. I was really impressed with that. It was also literally the only system, and this I would really emphasize, this may be the single most important thing that we found, or compelling aspect. It was literally the only system where we could not hear any appreciable compression artifacts. It also was really easy to install. It took us 30 minutes to install, 1 wire, 1 Ethernet cable plugged in, 2 screws to mount on the wall. So it took us 30 minutes to install, and we were using the software. It was also one of the more affordable solutions that we reviewed.
Thanks for that. Now, as we were sort of discussing and getting into the process of hosting this webinar, you let us know that you were recommending a new way of looking at the hybrid high flex room. So I'm just going to switch the slides and let you explain it entirely to make sure I don't mess it up for you.
Sure, no, that's fine. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide. So Active Flex is a pedagogical philosophy that I've recommended to our university because it represents some of the things that we're trying to accomplish. It basically emphasizes the concept of active learning, where students and instructors engage with each other in a highly collaborative, interactive way, where knowledge and skills are meaningfully applied. And then the other part of that is the flex part, and that just emphasizes flexible access. So Athens State is unique among schools in that we're an upper division university. We really focus on, for want of a better term, we're a finishing school. And so we receive students from the community college system, and also students who come in after going out in the workforce, and they come back later in life and they want to finish their degree. And so our university focuses on working with students under those conditions. And so flexible access to instruction is very important because a lot of our students work and they have very busy lives. And so being able to provide that flexible access means evening classes. It means having all kinds of engagement options where they can be online or face to face. And in fact, we have a pilot that we ran, a HighFlex pilot, which is a specific instructional model that allows students to choose every single week whether they want to engage in the classroom or in a synchronous online meeting or asynchronous. And they can change their minds from week to week to week. And so that flexibility of access is an important part of of who we are. So allowing that access is was important to us, and having technology that enables that to happen is vitally important.
And the model itself was well received, right? In both cases, students and instructors, that flexibility is really appreciated. Not just part of the brand, but the community you serve also really appreciates it.
Well, we have so for our HighFlex courses that we've taught, the overall consensus is that students really like having that flexible access, and even our instructors enjoy teaching that way. It's kind of energizing for them as well, and I've been excited to see the very creative ideas that they've come up with that have been kind of triggered or encouraged by having this type of course design. So yeah, it's definitely been a positive experience for us.
Great. So that's a lot of change, right? Some of it forced on you, a lot of it intentionally planned out, right? So there's lots of challenges that come up, right? As you come up with a new plan, you hit a roadblock. As you come up with new ideas, you start to find new ways that those ideas may or may not work. Can you walk us through some of the biggest challenges that you faced and how you got over them?
Sure. So I was thinking about this, and there were actually a few others I thought about later that I could add to the list, but I'm going to stick to these 5. Excuse me. The biggest one, I think, is just trying to figure out how to navigate the ocean, because like many, we were faced with a huge need, and we actually had a pretty substantial amount of grant funds that were available to us. And so we weren't constrained at the time by any real cost. We were constrained by just trying to make decisions. And of course, there's a ton of different ways to address all the different technology needs in the classroom. But what we found was that the best way to do that is to start with a strong philosophy of education that can kind of provide a trajectory and guide rails for your process. So in our case, focusing on the active flex philosophy kind of helped us kind of get some sense of direction, and also helped us when we were faced with choices, how to navigate which one of those things were. So I think guiding philosophy was a big one because it just helps set you in the right direction, and it also helps you stay on course. The second thing is research and testing. We got, like a lot of other institutions, we got just inundated with salespeople who were telling us, what we absolutely had to buy, and so we found pretty quickly that we couldn't trust what they told us. For whatever reason, we just found that it was important to have our own criteria and to test these devices in our own context. And that took a little bit of courage on our part, because what it meant was our process was slowed down. And the sales reps at the same time were pressuring us to quickly buy stuff because the stock, as you know, nationally and internationally, was becoming depleted. Yeah. In the end, I think it was the right move for us to take that time to carefully research and test things. But it did result in some delays for us that we had to absorb kind of in our own process. But one thing is really interesting about that, we would not have discovered Nareva had we not kind of been committed to this very thorough and process. Because the first round of sound systems that we tested that were highly recommended by sales reps, we found all of them to be disappointing. And it was really our disappointment and dissatisfaction with the initial results that led us back out to search further. And that's when we found Nareva.
So that oops, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Just that brings up a follow-on question there. So you were relying on your business partners, integrators you work with to find stuff, and then you supplemented what you were learning from them with your own research?
Correct.
Okay. Did you have any other than your own internal guidelines? Did you do any specific researching? Like, did you have a methodology for that, or was it mostly what are my other options out here?
Right. Well, of course, we talked with a lot of different entities and got recommendations from them. But again, the criteria that we had established helped us to kind of quickly filter through some of these things. Like one of the things I knew, for example, was that I really needed to have some way to accurately mic everyone in the room. And so we needed more than just a microphone, for example, on the instructor. There were lots of solutions where you could just slap on a lapel mic and get great sound, but only from the instructor. And we were committed to making sure that both the instructor and the students in the classroom were all clearly heard. And just that alone, frankly, eliminated a lot of the manufacturers. So yeah, it was a combination of, frankly, my experience that I brought to the circumstance with about 30 years in video and multimedia production.
You let the years go, David. Now everybody knows.
Right. Oh well. But anyway,
You talked a bit about the timeline too, that you were having challenges there.
So the uncontrollable timeline, and that was somewhat of our own making, just because we committed ourselves to research. There were some instances where by the time we got around to making the selection, and this isn't just with Nareva, this is, again, we were creating an ecosystem and had several components in that ecosystem, but we couldn't launch the ecosystem until everything was in place. And so that delay, our original goal was to have everything in place by December, by the beginning of the spring semester. And we really are only reaching that point now where everything's completely together. In fact, we're going to start training next week for our faculty, because we feel like now the system is in place enough that it's time to train them and formally urge them to start using the system. So those kind of back order items and just not knowing when stuff would come in was just created an uncontrollable timeline for us. We just couldn't always predict when stuff was going to come in. And so that kind of that's just one of those things you have to deal with. You have to communicate to your stakeholders, and you have to be innovative as well. We couldn't get stands for our webcams, our 360-degree webcams. So we ended up creating stands out of microphone stands and components we bought at Lowe's, because we just got tired of waiting for these stands to come in, and we needed to set them up. So I will say one thing that's really good is you guys we never experienced a back order with you all. Now, I don't know where you are now and all of that, but in our case, we just didn't have to wait very long when we placed our order with you guys. So I was happy that was one of the things we didn't have to wait on, because frankly, getting this the Nareva in and installed in all of our classroom spaces was really one of our bigger tasks.
Yeah, the physical piece is
Right.
often challenging, right? Sort of like as you alluded to the training aspect. It's not just training on how to join the Teams or the Zoom call, right? There's all the
Right.
other things in the room that needs to be addressed and taught through.
Right. And I guess the last challenge here is adoption. Well, I'm sorry. Yeah, you led into training. Sorry, I'm skipping over that, aren't I? So that is an important thing. And like I said earlier, we didn't launch training until we knew that all the spaces were intact and ready to use. And we're just now at that point. And in fact, my staff is pulling together hands-on training, and we're excited because a lot of folks are signing up. And so we're really looking forward to doing that hands-on training with them and to get them to use the system. But training is huge, and making sure that your faculty not only know just how to use it, but why to use it and what the implications are in the learning space. So that's a key part of that. So adoption, I guess, is the last thing, the last big challenge, and of course that's true in any technology initiative. And we've been careful with our faculty to articulate the reasoning behind the choices that we've made. We also believe that this intensive hands-on training we're providing, along with the how-to guides and tutorials that we're producing, will help with faculty adoption because it'll shorten that downtime, that learning curve for them. We also have our help desk staff and our technical support folks, and we make a point to be very accessible to them, to be very timely in our support. One of the things I tell my staff to do is to roam the halls during classes and to poke our heads in, to check on faculty, to make sure they're getting along okay. And that has our faculty really appreciate that. They don't see that as an intrusion. They really see that, they really welcomed that. And so all those things have really helped. And I guess the last thing about adoption is when we wired this new ecosystem, one of the things we were careful to do was not to disable the existing system so that faculty could begin using the new technology at their own pace and without feeling like they've been forced into it because they no longer have access to the old technology. So I think all of those things together are things that we've challenges we've had and things that we're doing to address those challenges.
What kind of feedback have you received from the students? This would have been a change for them as well, and obviously there's a big intentional process you've gone through that you've shared with us today. But did the students give you any feedback that was helpful or surprising?
So that's a better question for some of my instructors. I'll go ahead and speak on their behalf, but they're a little bit more in the direct line there. From my observation, the times that I have been in class with students who are using the technology, they have they've really they seem to adapt to it very well. I haven't seen any major issues in terms of their adoption. I will say maybe I could give an example of what an experience I had just a few days ago. So my office is just on the other side of a classroom space. And so the other night I was working late, and it was one of our evening classes. And I could hear through the wall this class in session. And this, for the very first time, this instructor was using the new technology, the Nareva and the other new technologies that we had, to allow her online and face-to-face students give presentations. And this was a large room. In fact, it was one of the larger rooms. So we actually had installed two of the HDL 300s. One of the things that I noticed was that whether the students were in the classroom or speaking from online space, the sound was loud, and they were clearly interacting with each other and they could understand each other and there were no sound issues. The sound was loud and it was crisp. It was a very perfect experience. They were speaking, they were hearing each other, they were seeing their presentations, and they were sharing both the online and face-to-face students, and they were really enjoying each other. And you could just tell by the sound of their voices. And the instructor was just ecstatic with this, that this was all possible. And so was I. It really is a privilege, and a real treat when you get to see that and kind of observe that kind of interaction and realize that it's only possible because there are certain technology affordances that are in place that make all that happen. And so when you make the right technology choices, you can just do some wonderful things pedagogically. So it was a great experience.
All right. So I'm going to roll into Q&A here, David, and I think I'm going to ask you a lot of these questions. They're really good.
Okay.
The first one here comes from David Grimes, and he wants to know if you're also recording your sessions using a soft codec or if you store the footage locally.
So one of the things that we encourage, part of our ecosystem, is to use Zoom. And the reason we've selected Zoom for a couple of reasons. One, because it is there's a good Zoom plugin that goes straight into Blackboard. And the other thing is it's a reasonably popular one, so there's a lower learning curve. Many people come to the course already knowing how to use Zoom. But the other thing is too, and this is the thing I really like, is we were looking at how do we connect all these devices in this space. And in our old ecosystem, every new device had to be wired into the system. And so what you ended up with was this massive amount of wires and cables. And every time a new device was introduced, you had to plug it in or connect a wire. The great thing about using Zoom is you connect through the internet. And so our large touchscreen monitor has a built-in computer. And the way we get that into the online space is just through Zoom. And the way any student shares their screen, whether they're in the class or whether they're in online, they use Zoom. And so the other thing about Zoom is that you can record your class sessions. So the instructors at their discretion are able to record the sessions. And then there's a plugin that was in Zoom that actually made a copy of the Zoom cloud recording and put that in our lecture capture system. And so that was just kind of a neat little process, all those dots connected. So that's how we did that.
That sounds handy. Question here from Scott. What is the average size of the classrooms you're using the Nareva HDL 300s in?
So that's a good question. I would say most of our classroom spaces are generally somewhere between maybe 25 by 40 feet is a general size. We have some that might be a little smaller and some that are larger. And in those spaces, we're using two, but we try to follow the guidelines that Nareva suggested. So anything, when we get to spaces that are much larger than 25 feet, we're looking at installing two of those Narevas.
Got it. A good question here from Merle, that's Merle Mason, that is not audio specific, but one that we get a lot, which is how many cameras are you supporting? Is it a single camera view for the room? Do you do a multi-camera view?
Yeah, so this is one of the things that we were trying to come up with was, how do we get all the participants seen? And so currently, I didn't really, we looked at that and what we settled on was a 360-degree webcam and specifically we chose the Candau. And one of the reasons we did that was frankly because it was available, but also because I really like the split screen. When it does 360 degree, it'll show the instructor at the front of the room and that's on the top. and the students then on the bottom. So plus it has several different modality options, so you can select other options where what it'll do is when students start speaking, it'll hunt for, and then the camera will it has multiple camera angles, and it'll show, you know, other students as they speak. So so that's what we went with, was a 360-degree webcam.
All right. There's a question here from Brian Wright. This one's for me, David. I got this one. Can I use the Nareva HDL 300 just as microphone and direct audio output to my ceiling speakers? The answer to that is yes. David, I don't think you did that in any of your rooms, right?
Say that again.
You're not using our system just as microphone pickup, right? You use the speakers as well in all of your rooms.
Correct.
Got it. Oh, here's a good one from Todd Constantine. Did you have issues with a lot of ambient noise from the classroom, the people in the room? Were they making noise, and was it well handled?
Not as much for, I mean, obviously there is a little bit of classroom noise depending on your course. I think that's going to vary from course to course. The real challenge, honestly, I find with noise is the noise that you get from the air conditioning system, noise that you get from any fans or projectors, noise that comes in from the hallway. And so being able to reduce that noise. But then the other key factor, honestly, really is the compression artifacts. They are extremely distracting. And the other systems that we tested, it's very noticeable. And frankly, I had gotten to the point in my search where I just had despaired of ever being able to have a, you know, one of these systems where that wasn't just a major factor. And,
Right.
you know, it's basically this little hiss thing that goes in the background. And some people, some of my folks described it as voices. You know, it sounded like other voices, it's people speaking. It's very distracting. And honestly, that was really one of the powerful things that we immediately recognized with the Nareva system. And frankly, one of the main reasons why I'm willing to come here and present like this today, because I'm really excited about how uniquely different and superior that compression algorithm is that they've got, because it really is very different and very unique.
Thanks, David.
Sure.
Two questions left for you, both really good. We'll take this one first from Bob. Bob is asking for just a general timeline from the time you started researching until the time it was used. What do you figure the A to Z there is? How long did it take?
Well, for us, it's taken almost a year because, you know, we started in the summer of last year, and here we are now. I would say that without, you know, if we didn't have to deal with delays, it could have been a 6-month process. That the just the delays and the back orders are the things that really slowed us down.
All right, and then the last one is from Lynn, who caught on your talk about grants and was wondering if you could share what the funders were, or if there were specific grants that support classroom technology.
Most of the money was CARES Act funding
Okay.
that was dispersed to us, and yeah, so that's most of the source of the funds.
So most of it came from, and you handle that internally yourselves, or do you work with someone to do that with you?
Well, that actually, those grant funds, I guess it was an allocation, came officially to our university from the state.
From the
And
state, yeah.
right, and then we worked with our own office of finance to, you know, they monitored that and administered that. I will say that, one of the big things that makes all of this work is a really robust internet network structure. Our whole concept and what we're trying to do is very vulnerable to that. And so that's one of the things as you go down this road, you really have to shore that up and make sure that you have a really good network infrastructure, or you have a potential crisis on your hands.
Yeah.
So the reason I said that is that we used a large part of those funds to address that issue as well.
To address the network issue.
Correct. Making sure that our network could deliver what we wanted to do pedagogically.
Got it. Okay. And you know what? We have time for one more question, and I really like this one. I know we've talked about it all the way through, but when you were doing your requirement gathering, right? When you're managing all of that, did you work with faculty and students, faculty and IT? Did you involve every stakeholder? How did you gather that?
So we were really lucky that during that time, we were doing a HighFlex pilot. And so the HighFlex pilot had a collection of, I guess it was 5 different instructors who were teaching differently with different students. And so they were like our guinea pigs. We got to go, we went into that room, and every time we had a new system, we would install that system. And so we could work comparatively. And we could compare all these different systems, play one and immediately test it against another one. And also get instructor reactions to the tools that we were using, and also with those students. So it was really like a live experiment. So that was very fortunate for us, because one of the things that you don't really know until you actually get it in a dynamic space, some of the issues and some of the needs that are gonna occur. And so having a good having several different classes meeting in that same space to experiment on really made that easy to do. It would have been even better if there was one thing that I would have done differently, it would have been to try to engage an even larger segment of our faculty. But the pandemic really worked against that. And also the timeline that we were under, we had to spend all this money by December. And so we had to move very quickly in trying to go through our process of testing, but then also ordering and receiving and paying for the product. So I was very glad that we had these group of instructors and courses and students that we could test this out on and get their feedback.
Okay. Well, David, we are just about at time. Thank you so much for your time today. To everyone who is still in the session, there are lots of unanswered questions that we will answer in our follow-ups. We'll do everything we can to answer all of them, and I'll hand it over to Stephen for the closeout.
All right, perfect. Well, thank you, Adrian, and also, of course, David. We really appreciate your time here today and sharing your expertise. And our audience appreciates it as well, for sure. And that said, I would like to thank our audience for joining us today as well. For those of you who enjoyed our presentation today, there are many more upcoming web seminars like this one that are provided by us here at University Business, which is the leader in editorial coverage of news as well as trends and current issues in higher education. Our wide range of readers subscribe for free to UB, and they stay up to date with us through our print magazine, University Business, the digital edition of the magazine, our various newsletters, including UB Daily, which is our daily newsletter, and UB Tech, which features the most relevant EdTech news in higher ed, as well as web seminars like this one today. Also, for those of you who would like to watch this web seminar again, or maybe for those of you who believe that the solutions provided would be really helpful to your colleagues, you will be pleased to know that an archive recording of this web seminar will be available at the URL, which you can see provided on your screen here. You can also expect to receive an email from our team here at UB at some point tomorrow, which will include a link to all of the slides that you saw. So with that, on behalf of University Business, this is Stephen Blackburn. Thanks everyone and have a great spring semester. Take care, be well, and stay safe everyone.